You're eager to hone your skills in cold water, high-altitude diving, but what starts as a routine dive soon plunges into chaos. As daylight fades and temperatures drop, you find yourself deep underground, navigating a labyrinth of submerged tunnels. The water is clear at first, the passageways vast, but then the cave shifts. Narrowing walls, surging currents, and a sudden bottleneck trap you. The once open maze now feels like it's closing in, each turn more disorienting and treacherous than the last. This is Fatal Tragedies, with the story of the most tragic diving deaths in human history. Starting us off is the story of an 18-year-old girl who had set out for a training dive in Lake McDonald. Speaking of Lake McDonald, it's the largest lake in Glacier National Park, stretching about 10 miles in length and more than a mile in width. It reaches a depth of 472 feet and lies at an elevation of 3,153 feet. The lake fills a valley shaped by erosion and glacial activity and is situated on the west side of the Continental Divide. Known by the locals as the place where they dance, this lake was a significant site for their ceremonies and gatherings, particularly in the area now known as Apgar. The English name, Lake McDonald, honors Duncan MacDonald, a Hudson's Bay Company trader who carved his name into a tree by the lake in 1878 while working in the Flathead Valley. And it was on November 1st, 2020, that Lake McDonald in Glacier National Park, Montana, became the scene of a heart-wrenching diving accident. Linnea Mills, an 18-year-old diver from Missoula, Montana, had come to the lake to hone her skills in cold water and high-altitude diving. She discovered the wonders of scuba diving in 2017 while assisting with marine biology projects at the University of North Carolina. She earned her PADI open water certification after just 4 dives and later dove at the Great Barrier Reef in 2018. This certification, the first level for scuba divers, meant that she was still a novice. Before the tragic event at Lake McDonald, all of her dives had been in warm, shallow water. To pursue her advanced open water certification, she enrolled in a class with Go Dive in October of 2020. This particular class was designed to train divers for the challenge of cold water, which Montana's lakes provide. Despite numerous red flags on the first day, she was eager to return for the second and final day of the course. Little did she know that things would take a different turn. Lake McDonald presents unique challenges for divers. High-altitude diving is complex due to reduced atmospheric pressure, which affects buoyancy and makes decompression more difficult. Additionally, the lake's water temperature can drop to near freezing, especially in November. These frigid conditions can quickly cause hypothermia if divers aren't properly equipped. Her previous dives in the warm water of Australia's Great Barrier Reef is where her passion for marine biology was first ignited. But things were now a little different. But how? This dive was meant to be a significant step forward in her training, an opportunity to tackle the challenges of cold water and high-altitude diving. Despite her excitement, she had no prior experience in such extreme conditions. She was known for her meticulous nature and dedication. She kept detailed journals of her adventures and always rigorously followed her instructor's guidance. Her passion for diving was evident to everyone around her. Yet, on that fateful day, several factors would come together, leading to a tragic outcome. A perfect storm of errors and oversights unfolded that day. The group of divers, including instructor Debbie Snow and fellow trainees Bob Gentry and a 14-year-old known as E.G., arrived at Lake McDonald as daylight was fading. The temperature was already below freezing, further complicating the dive. Despite the less-than-ideal conditions, the group decided to proceed. Linnea had recently purchased a second-hand dry suit, adding another layer of uncertainty to the challenging environment they were about to face. And just to make sure we're on the same page, here's a little difference between wet and dry suits. Dry suits are specialized pieces of diving equipment designed to keep divers warm and dry in cold water. This is unlike wetsuits, which trap a thin layer of water between the body and the suit that the body then warms. Dry suits create a barrier that prevents water from entering altogether. In a wetsuit, the water layer moves with the body's movement, sometimes letting cold water in, which the body then has to heat up. This process can be inefficient, since water draws heat away from the body much faster than air does. A dry suit, unlike a wetsuit, traps a layer of air between your body and the suit, keeping you much warmer because air doesn't draw heat away from your body as quickly as water does. You can also wear warm clothing underneath a dry suit for added insulation. However, dry suits come with their own set of risks that divers must be trained to manage. As you descend, the air inside the dry suit is compressed by the increasing water pressure. To maintain warmth, divers must add more air into the suit using an inflator valve connected to their air supply. Simply pressing a button pumps air from the tank into the suit, balancing the air volume. However, as you ascend, the pressure decreases and the air inside the suit expands. If the expanding air isn't released, the suit can act like a balloon, rapidly pulling the diver to the surface. To manage this, dry suits have a dump valve to release the expanding air. Mastering the use of this valve and balancing the air inside the suit is crucial for safe dry suit diving. And being the first time to wear a dry suit, Linnea had no experience using it. To make it even worse, her dry suit was missing a crucial component, an inflator hose. This hose is essential for adding air to the suit as divers descend, preventing the suit from squeezing tightly against the body due to water pressure, which can make it difficult to move and breathe. Unfortunately, neither she nor her instructor noticed the missing hose at the lake. Instructors Debbie Snow and Seth Liston met with trainees Bob Gentry and EG at Lake McDonald, which sits at an elevation of 3,150 feet. Despite their roles, Snow and Liston had limited experience with dry suits and high-altitude diving. Buoyancy control can be particularly challenging at this elevation, but the team failed to conduct thorough gear checks or a proper pre-dive briefing. Instead of using a quick-release weight belt, the instructors placed 44 pounds of lead weights into Linnea's dry suit and BCD pockets. This setup was extremely dangerous as it would be nearly impossible for her to quickly ditch the weights in an emergency ascent. As they entered the water around 5 p.m., the lack of preparation quickly became evident. Snow guided Linnea and EG down to a depth of 5 meters for a brief period, but EG soon felt uneasy and was brought back to the surface. In the chaos, Snow didn't notice Linnea was already struggling. The freezing water had squeezed much of the air out of her dry suit, causing it to press tightly against her body and making it hard to breathe and move. When Snow returned with Liston, they led Linnea, Gentry, and another student down to 18 meters. The situation rapidly worsened. Linnea struggled with buoyancy control due to the missing inflator hose. She was attempting to use her BCD to maintain buoyancy, but it wasn't sufficient to counter the weight and the pressure compressing her dry suit. At this depth, the pressure was significantly higher, compounding the difficulties that she faced. The increasing pressure at 18 meters tightened Linnea's dry suit around her, restricting her movements and making each breath a struggle. Desperately, she stood on an underwater ledge, signaling for help, but Snow focused on the other students and failed to notice her distress. Gentry, equipped with a GoPro, saw her frantic struggle. Her eyes were wide with fear, and her situation was growing dire. Racing over to her, he saw her overbalance and begin to plummet uncontrollably. Without the ability to release her weights quickly, her descent was wild and uncontrolled. Gentry pursued her, catching up at a depth of 26 meters. The sight was harrowing. Her frantic movements were a stark contrast to the crushing pressure of her suit. Bob Gentry saw that her dry suit was compressing her so tightly that she couldn't breathe. His training kicked in, and he reached for her BCD inflator, hoping to make her buoyant enough to float to the surface. But her BCD was already fully inflated, and she continued to sink. Desperate, Bob tried to remove her weight belt. If he could lighten her, he might be able to swim her up to safety with the help of his own BCD's air. He fumbled to find the quick-release buckle on her weight belt, but discovered there was none. He felt for quick-release weight pockets integrated into the BCD, but they were absent, and the weights were firmly in place. At 104 feet, her regulator fell out of her mouth. Bob was breathing heavily and running out of air. Realizing he couldn't go any deeper without risking his own life, he had to make a harrowing choice. He let go of Linnea and made an emergency ascent. As he surfaced, he scanned desperately for help, but there was nobody to assist him. Debbie Snow, noticing that 2 divers were missing, surfaced and learned from Bob that Linnea was still underwater and unable to surface. Snow made a brief dive to search for her, but was unable to locate her in the dim, murky water. With time slipping away, Snow and Liston swapped their tanks and dove again. Their search took them to 128 feet, where they finally found Linnea's body. Unable to pull her up with her BCD still attached, they had to remove it to lighten the load and bring her to the surface. Upon surfacing, they were out of range of a mobile phone tower. A couple who had witnessed the tragedy volunteered to drive 30 minutes to the nearest tower to get a signal and call for emergency help. Once the investigators arrived, Debbie Snow then took the critical step of removing Linnea's dive computer, choosing not to hand it over to investigators. She also took Linnea's course paperwork, which detailed her progress through the training. The BCD, which had been heavily loaded with weights, was later recovered. In total, Linnea's dry suit and BCD contained 44 pounds of lead weights. This significant amount of weight, combined with the missing inflator hose and other oversights, painted a sobering picture of the challenges faced during the dive. The tragedy at Lake McDonald raises profound questions. How did the instructors overlook such crucial gear checks? Why was there no thorough briefing? What could have been done to prevent this entire disaster? The answers reveal a series of critical oversights and mistakes, each compounding the other, leading to a devastating outcome for Linnea. For her family, the loss was overwhelming. They remembered Linnea as a bright, meticulous, and passionate young woman, brimming with life and dreams. Named after the delicate flower, Linnea Rose Mills had truly blossomed during her 18 years with a future full of promise. Her dedication to helping others and making a difference in the world was cut tragically short. In the wake of Linnea's death, her family embarked on a long and painful legal battle, filing a $12 million negligence lawsuit against Gold Dive, its owners, instructors, and PADI worldwide. The lawsuit alleged gross negligence in preparation and supervision, contributing to Linnea's death. It highlighted numerous failures, including inadequate gear checks, insufficient training, and poor supervision. PADI was also accused of failing to enforce safety protocols among its affiliated businesses and partners. Instructors Debbie Snow and Seth Liston faced criticism for their lack of experience with dry suits and high-altitude diving, as well as their failure to recognize Linnea's distress. Federal investigators looking into the incident because it occurred at National Park Service property ultimately decided not to pursue criminal charges. The U.S. Attorney for Montana stated that while Snow was likely at fault, proving criminal culpability beyond a reasonable doubt wasn't possible. Despite setting the civil case, the Mills family continued to advocate for greater accountability and safety in the diving industry. They hoped that Linnea's story would serve as a powerful cautionary tale, urging diving schools and training agencies to prioritize safety as well as additional proper training. The story of Linnea Mills is a heartbreaking example of how swiftly a routine dive can become a fatal disaster. It underscores the vital need for thorough training, meticulous equipment checks, and vigilant supervision in high-risk activities. Linnea was a bright and passionate young woman, and her loss is deeply felt by her family, her friends, and the greater diving community at large. This tragedy remains a reminder of the importance of safety in all forms of diving. If you ever find yourself caving and come across a section called the Intestine, it's probably wise to reconsider your route like a sane person. But why, you ask? Well, the people in our first story pressed on and discovered just how that eerie section earned its unsettling name. On Friday, August 19th, 2016, at 1:43 p.m., a group of Italian scuba divers was getting ready to dive into the crystal-clear waters off the coast of Poino, Italy. Poino, a charming resort town located 124 miles southeast of Naples, attracts visitors from all over the world, especially those passionate about diving. The plan for the day was to explore the immersion in parete, which means submerged wall. This enormous underwater cliff, dotted with cave openings and teeming with marine life, offered an ideal diving spot. Leading the dive was Mauro Camardella, the owner of a local diving center and an experienced instructor. At 49, he spent more time in the water than out, diving almost every day. Joining him were Mauro Tancredi, his assistant instructor, and their 58-year-old friend, Silvio Anzola. While Silvio wasn't an instructor, he was an expert diver who shared Mauro's deep love for underwater exploration. Besides being famous for its stunning underwater rock formations and mysterious caves, Palinuro is also notorious for what some call the curse of Palinuro. Over the years, the town has witnessed several tragic diving accidents. In 1984, 2 underwater explorers lost their lives during a research dive. A decade later, in 1996, 3 divers from Poland perished after becoming trapped in a cave. Then, in 2012, 4 more divers were killed when the roof of the cave they were exploring collapsed. However, the group of divers on this day didn't plan to enter any caves, so they weren't concerned about the town's dark history. After all, they were simply there to enjoy the beautiful scenery beneath the waters. Once in the water, the divers marveled at the breathtaking underwater views. As planned, they began resurfacing around 11:30 a.m. 9 of them surfaced together, waiting for the dive organizer and his 2 friends. They chatted excitedly, sharing their thoughts on the submerged wall and assuming the 3 experienced divers were just taking their time, perhaps caught up in the beauty of the dive or discovering something new. But as more time passed and the 3 men still hadn't surfaced, the group's excitement began to wane. They started to worry that something might have gone wrong. Some of the divers, growing increasingly worried, swam back to the wall in search of the missing men. Although concerned, none of them held cave diving certifications, and the fear of becoming victims themselves kept them from venturing inside. Instead, they scoured the surrounding sea for any sign of their friends, continuing their search late into the night. Exhausted and without success, they eventually decided to contact the authorities, a step that probably should have been taken much earlier. The Palinuro Fire Service arrived sometime later, but while they were trained in underwater rescue, they weren't specialized in cave diving. Realizing that they needed more expertise, they called upon a local 61-year-old named Fabio. Fabio was one of Palinuro's most respected diving experts and had been the first to map out a cave within the wall known as the Grotto della Scala, or Ladder Cave. The cave earned its name from 2 long vertical sections that resembled ladder rungs. The entrance to the grotto is narrow, only about 4 feet wide and located approximately 46 feet below the water's surface on the wall. Upon entering, the first tunnel extends horizontally before meeting a vertical shaft that descends steeply. The bottom of this shaft curves and gradually flattens out, leading to the end of the tunnel. At the end of this passage, about 164 feet below the surface, there's an extremely tight restriction. The tunnel's bottom is a mix of sand and silt, which can easily be disturbed, leading to a silt out. a situation where the water becomes so clouded that visibility drops to zero. This is particularly dangerous for inexperienced cave divers, who may struggle to navigate or manage in such conditions. When Fabio first mapped the cave, he named this cramped passage the Intestine of Palaniero, a name that conveyed its tight, twisting nature. Given his experience and knowledge of the cave, Fabio had a grim feeling about the situation. He doubted there would be a happy ending. The intestine stretches about 52 feet, and its undulating walls narrow to less than 3 feet at certain points. If the missing divers had made it through this tight passage, they would have encountered a fork, one tunnel leading upward and another continuing straight ahead. If they chose the tunnel above them, they would have reached sea level but still found themselves trapped inside the rock, likely in a small air pocket at the top of the shaft. However, the air pocket would have had too little oxygen to sustain even one person for long, let alone 3. The only real hope for the divers was if they had managed to navigate through the intestine and then bypass the vertical shaft, continuing straight ahead. Had they done this, they would have reached the back entrance of the cave and emerged into the open sea on the other side of the rock. But Fabio was certain that if the men had made it out, they would have already been found. He kept his fears to himself, but deep down, he believed the divers were already dead long before the authorities had even been contacted. After Fabio arrived at the scene, he was asked to dive into the cave and investigate. He entered the water, made his way to the entrance, descended the first vertical shaft, and reached the bottom tunnel where the opening to the intestine is located. As he shone his flashlight into the tunnel, he quickly realized the situation was dire. The passage was so heavily silted out, the visibility was nearly zero. When Fabio resurfaced, he confirmed to the authorities that the men were either trapped inside the intestine or up in the air pocket on the second vertical shaft. He knew the odds were slim that they'd survived given the extreme conditions inside the cave. Fabio understood that the only purpose left in searching was to recover the bodies. As word of the missing divers spread throughout Palaniero, the town was gripped by disbelief. Almost everybody knew the two Maros, personally or by reputation, and they were highly regarded as expert divers. Social media was flooded with messages of love and hope, clinging to the belief that they might still come out alive, despite the bleak outlook from the start. Once enough time had passed for the silt to settle, it took the rescue divers just 4 hours to locate Camardella and Maro T. Unfortunately, both were found dead just outside the entrance of the intestine. The silt had been so thick that even though Fabio had been mere feet away during his earlier dive, he couldn't see their bodies. Later, Silvio's body was discovered inside the intestine, wedged tightly in one of the narrowest sections. The rock held him so firmly that it took an additional 6 days to free his body from the tunnel. After the recovery, an investigation was launched to determine what had happened. The official report suggests that when the group of 12 divers reached the wall, they split into 2 smaller groups to explore. It's unclear whether this was planned or a spontaneous decision, but Camardella, Maro T, and Silvio ended up entering the cave. Evidence suggests that the men had successfully navigated the intestine, but on their way back, Silvio got trapped. With Silvio at the rear, it seems he became stuck while the others continued unaware. As Silvio struggled, he likely caused a significant amount of silt to be stirred up, reducing visibility to near zero. Camardella and Maro T exited the cave without realizing that Silvio wasn't with them. They might have paused to check if he was lagging behind, but when he didn't appear, they entered the cave to find him. It's unaware how much air the two had left when they re-entered the grotto, but it's believed they realized Silvio was in trouble around 11:30 a.m. This would have been close to the point when all 3 were reaching their reserve air supply, if not already there. If Silvio panicked while trapped, his breathing rate would have increased, depleting his air supply faster. As the two tried to save Silvio, it's likely they lost track of time and failed to monitor their own air levels. The moment they ran out of air was probably when they first realized the severity of their situation. Camardella and Maroti are remembered as selfless heroes who gave their lives trying to save a friend. Moving on. From a young age in Belgium, it was clear that Mark Slushy was destined for greatness. As a child, he was fearless, curious, and excelled in everything he set his mind to. His determination and skill were evident when, in 1988, he completed a solo swim across the English Channel, covering 55 miles in less than 11 hours. Just a few years later in 1994, he set a new high-altitude bungee jumping record, leaping from a hot air balloon 22,000 feet above the Earth's surface. By that time, Mark was also an accomplished diver. In 2011, he produced a documentary called Sharkwise after spending months observing great white sharks. In 2016, he joined an American scuba diving expedition to explore the wreck of the Andrea Doria, located 250 feet beneath the Atlantic off the coast of Massachusetts. This is just a glimpse of Mark's impressive achievements. As he grew older, Mark shifted his focus toward coaching and consulting business, but his need for adrenaline never waned. Exploring new frontiers, challenging himself, and pushing past his mental and physical limits were what fueled him. On the morning of June 28, 2018, Mark and his longtime friend and fellow diver, Laurent Richard, planned to do just that. Their destination was the mysterious Fester Cave Complex, hidden beneath the placid waters of Leucot Pond. They had permission from the landowner to dive at the site, who was a fan of Mark's work. Given Mark's reputation, securing approval was little more than a formality, as his name was respected wherever he went. Mark and Laurent were well aware of the dangers they'd face in the sprawling, largely unexplored Fester Cave Complex. Despite the risks, they were determined not to let anything spoil their experience. After gearing up, they slipped beneath the surface and made their way to the cave entrance. Mark, known for his playful nature, was joking around the whole time before they entered the water, which started to make Laurent a bit uneasy about how Mark might behave once they were inside of the cave. The dive began smoothly, and the excitement of discovering uncharted territory fueled their adrenaline. Every challenge they encountered only added to their thrill, like when Mark's gear got snagged on a sharp rock, tearing it. Fortunately, he had his backup equipment and managed to resolve the issue. However, as the initial adrenaline rush wore off, both Mark and Laurent began to tire. Before long, they reached their bailout time, the point where their air reserves were running low and it was time to turn back. Bailout time is a critical moment in any dive, marking the point of no return, with some leeway factored in for unforeseen issues during the ascent. Mark knew their dive was nearing its end, but his adventurous spirit pushed him to continue, much like the legendary explorer Jean-Claude Gouin nearly 70 years earlier. While Laurent turned and began swimming back toward the exit, Mark decided to press on, alone. Ignoring the cardinal rule of diving, never dive solo. He waved goodbye to his friend and swam in the opposite direction. He continued until he reached an astounding depth of 380 feet, venturing into the unknown, driven by his insatiable desire to explore and conquer new frontiers. Diving to a depth of 380 feet inside a cave is an extreme feat, and at such depths, air consumption increases significantly. Mark had ventured far deeper than he had initially planned. While he might have allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction at reaching this depth, he knew he needed to return to the surface quickly. Pushing beyond safe limits could lead to dire consequences, and unfortunately, something went horribly wrong on his return trip. When Mark failed to resurface after what felt like an eternity, Laurent became increasingly concerned. Gathering additional divers, he led a rescue mission back into the cave system to search for his missing friend. The situation looked grim, though there was still a glimmer of hope that Mark was okay and that they'd all be laughing about the incident later over beer. However, as they descended, Laurent decided to film the rescue, perhaps hoping to capture Mark's eventual safe return. As the team delved deeper, they encountered disturbed silt in the water, a sign that someone had recently been there. With renewed hope, they pressed on, But Laurent became so focused on filming that he unintentionally separated from the group. The other divers continued the search, but they never found Mark. When they resurfaced after the failed rescue attempt, they made a grim realization. Laurent was also missing. Instead of just one missing diver, now there were two. A large-scale rescue operation was launched in the days following Mark and Laurent's disappearance, but after a week it was called off. It seemed like both men might remain missing forever. However, in September 2018, 2 months after the incident, Mark's body was discovered and removed from the cave. Laurent, on the other hand, proved far more elusive, and his body was never found. The exact cause of Mark's death remains unknown, but many expert divers believe that he was unqualified to attempt such a dangerous dive. Some argue that Mark was granted permission due to his fame and reputation, which ironically may have contributed to his demise, and that of his friends as well. The two could have gotten lost and run out of air, or they might have suffered from hypocapria, excessive CO2 in the blood and tissue, or hypoxia, which is insignificant oxygen levels. Speaking of dangerous dives, on the evening of January 15th, 1995, at 8:06 p.m., Frank shut his eyes and let the warm water of the shower cascade over him. As the last light of the day faded outside, his mind drifted through the day's events and what lay ahead. But suddenly, a jolt of unease pulled him from his reverie. His son, Conleth, known to everyone as Con, was due home by now. After a weekend of adventure with friends, Con should have been back. He was part of the Kevin Street Caving Club at Dublin Institute of Technology and had spent the previous day exploring challenging tunnels in a nearby cave system. Today, the plan was for a more relaxed exploration of Cradle Hole Cave, just over the border in the UK. Once they wrapped up, they would drive the 2.5 hours back to Dublin. The clock ticked on, and Frank's unease began to grow. Frank turned off the shower, and the soothing sound of running water was quickly replaced by the distant murmur of voices from downstairs. A wave of certainty hit him. His gut feeling was right. After quickly drying off and dressing, he dashed downstairs, only to find a police officer talking to his wife. The look on their faces spoke volumes. In Northern Ireland's rugged landscape, where bedrock formed sinkholes, caves, and springs, Cradle Hole stood out as the largest. Locally known as Deadliest, meaning sinkhole, Cradle Hole spans over 100 meters in length, 60 meters in width, and plunges 35 meters deep. Once a collection of smaller caves beneath the surface collapsed long ago due to the relentless erosion by the river. Thousands of years of geological activity had weakened the limestone, causing it to sink and creating a deep void. The river, now rerouted through Cradle Hole, gave the cave a haunting echo of rushing water. The cave is split into two distinct sections, Upper Cradle Hole and Lower Cradle Hole. Visitors to the upper part must wade through a river that leads into spacious chambers adorned with stunning formations. From there, the water flows into an underground lake stretching 230 feet long. Remarkably, the passage connecting the upper and lower section was only discovered in 2010. The water within is cold and deep, offering a unique experience for caving enthusiasts, making Cradle Hole a sought-after destination for avid cavers. At 21, Con was already a passionate adventurer with the dream of climbing Mount Everest, though he equally cherished caving. Among the group of 10 exploring Cradle Hole that Sunday were 20-year-old Philip and 22-year-old Patrick, both members of the Kevin Street Caving Club. Patrick was one of the founders, and Philip joined about a year later. Despite their caving club affiliation, the group was relatively inexperienced in the cave's nuances. Around noon, the college students ventured into Cradle Hole and made their way to the vast chamber. On the far side lay a narrow tunnel that extended further into the cave system. The group waded through the river towards the tunnel, and as they approached, Patrick instructed the others to wait while he assessed the safety of the passage. He observed that the river's current to the wide chamber was swift, and he worried it might become dangerously strong in this narrower tunnel. To make matters worse, the water level was nearly at the top of the passage. Although the tunnel might widen beyond the entrance, allowing them to pass through, Patrick had no way of knowing for sure without venturing in. Unfortunately, by the time he realized the danger, it was already too late. In the days leading up to January 15th, the area around Cradle Hole had endured heavy rainfall. While the weather was clear on the day of their caving trip, rainwater was still filtering through the limestone into the river, intensifying its depth and current. Despite this, Patrick seemed unaware of the escalating risk. With a determined smile, he took a deep breath and tried to swim against the powerful current. In an instant, he vanished from sight. Philip, who was closest to Patrick, rushed into the frigid, raging water to help, but he too was immediately engulfed by the current and swept away. Han followed in a desperate attempt to assist, but he too was quickly lost to the current. The current had driven all three into a narrow, flooded passage where the water level was dangerously close to the ceiling. The space for air was minimal, making each breath increasingly scarce as they were forced through the confined, submerged tunnel. At the other end of the tunnel, the remaining 7 members of the group were left in a state of bewilderment. Initially, they thought the disappearance of their friends was a prank, a misguided joke. But as time dragged on, their anticipation shifted to dread. What was meant to be a routine exploration had quickly turned into a nightmare. The 7 split up, desperately searching for the missing trio in different chambers and passages of Cradle Hole. Their search extended for nearly 4 hours, but there was no sign of the 3. Realizing they needed help, they exited the cave around 4 p.m. and called for emergency assistance. The response was swift. About 50 rescuers, including experienced cavers and police divers, rushed to the scene. 2 helicopters from the Royal Air Force scoured the river's outlet area, but as night fell, no trace of the 3 were found. The search was suspended for the night. As the operation wound down, authorities began notifying the families. Frank, deep down, had a chilling premonition. He felt certain he would be identifying his son's body in the coming days. The following morning, the search resumed. With the river's current and height greatly diminished, hope remained that the 3 men might have found a pocket of air or a large chamber where they could have sheltered from the water. Tragically, that hope was in vain. After 24 hours after entering Cradle Hole, the bodies of Patrick and Philip were found. It took another day to recover Khan's body. Today, a memorial plaque stands outside Cradle Hole, honoring the 3 young lives that were lost far too soon. Sistema Sac Actun is an underwater cave system on Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula along the Caribbean coast. It gained fame in 2008 when the remains of a mastodon were discovered just a few meters below the surface. Despite its anthropological importance, this is even more enticing to experienced recreational divers seeking to explore uncharted depths and challenging themselves. The cave network is unique, consisting of multiple open-top sinkholes connected by submerged passages. On the day in question, the weather was warm, clear, and sunny as 3 divers prepared for an unforgettable adventure. Their identities were never publicly released, but they were all seasoned divers. The lead diver, a 33-year-old guide and certified cave diving instructor from Guantánamo Roo, Mexico, had extensive experience with the cave system. He had previously explored it with students and clients and had logged around 25 hours using closed-circuit rebreathing gear, though he had only used it in open water settings. The second diver was also equipped with a closed-circuit rebreather, while the third used an open-circuit system. By the early afternoon, around 2:15 p.m., the men suited up, reviewed their dive plan, and double-checked their equipment, ready to embark on their dive. The divers finally entered the water and made their way into the submerged labyrinth of the tunnel system. The dive was organized into several sections, each marked with a start and end point to help them stay on track and monitor their progress. The first segment was a straightforward 30-minute swim from point 1 to point 4, ending at the impressive Cenote Uno. Along the way, they installed safety lines to guide them in case of emergency. When they reached Onu, they surfaced to catch their breath, enjoy the fresh air, and discuss their plan for the next stage of the dive. At around 2:50 p.m., they embarked on the more challenging second stage, heading towards the notoriously difficult cenote of Neres. They were caught off guard when their progress was halted by a narrow bottleneck in the passage. Their bulky gear made it impossible to pass through. The lead diver, having scraped and bruised his arms and legs on the tight passage, decided to turn back and guide the others to Neres via an alternate route. The detour was manageable and didn't disrupt their schedule. By 3:15 p.m., it seemed they had reached Neres on time. Diver 3 signaled to the group that he had reached his turn pressure. He had used 1/3 of his air supply, indicating that he needed to turn back. The plan was for Diver 3 to use another third of his air supply on the return trip, leaving the final third as a reserve in case of trouble. As Diver 3 began his return journey, Divers 1 and 2 continued forward and eventually passed Point 7 on their way to Point 8. They were now in a deeper and more challenging part of the cave system. Just as they were approaching Neres, Diver 2 was startled by an unexpected flash of light behind him. He turned around to investigate and saw Diver 3 in grave distress. Diver 1's face was ashen and his eyes were wide with fear. Diver 2 couldn't immediately determine if it was a malfunction or a seizure. He rushed over to help, only to find Diver 1 flailing wildly. In the chaos, Diver 1's regulator was knocked out of his mouth and became entangled in his gear. Diver 2 had to make a crucial decision in such a high-risk situation, as a panicked diver can inadvertently pull at your gear and endanger both of you. Diver 2, trained to handle such emergencies, had to distance himself to avoid a potential fatal entanglement. In intense situations, panicked divers can lash out, grabbing at would-be rescuers, which can lead to injury, damaged gear, or even prevent the rescuer from escaping. As Diver 2 made his way out, he encountered Diver 3 near Point 7. They surfaced at 4:52 p.m. and immediately raised the alarm. The recovery operation began the following day, led by 2 local cave diving instructors, supported by local divers, police officers, and representatives from civil authorities, all ready to assist if needed. Diver 1's body was recovered quickly. While the exact cause of death wasn't determined, it was suggested that cognitive impairment and drowning were likely factors. The key question remained: what had triggered the cognitive impairment? Diver 2's account suggested the possibility of hypercapnia or elevated carbon dioxide, or hyperoxia, being excessive oxygen, or perhaps a combination of both. Data from Diver 1's dive computer showed several oxygen spikes during the dive, but experts and medical professionals believe that these spikes were not high enough to cause hyperoxia. Which among these tragedies do you think is the worst? And what do you think could have been done differently to prevent these tragedies? Share your thoughts in the comments section down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.